Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny Eastwood, and in today's case we are covering a story from Brisbane, Australia. Now, before we get into it, I do want to give you a warning that this one is quite graphic. It's pretty disturbing, and there are some graphic details in there about what happens to this victim. So just be aware that there is some content that might not be suitable for you, so if you want to skip this one, that is totally fine. I will hopefully see you in another video. Otherwise, if you're new here, every week I post a new true crime story from somewhere in the world. Okay, so it's a big one, so let's go ahead and get straight into it. In the early hours of the 21st of October 1989, Brisbane housewife Edward Baldock awoke early in the morning to discover that her husband of 25 years hadn't returned home from the night before. 47-year-old Edward Baldock, father of 5 and grandfather to 2, worked as a road paver for the local council. Edward had been off work the day before and he'd gone to take part in a competitive darts competition that he actually won at his favourite pub, the Caledonian Club in Kangaroo Point. Elaine was immediately worried when Edward hadn't come home. She knew that he liked to go out drinking with his friends a lot, but he never ever stayed out late, and he certainly wouldn't do so without at least giving her a phone call first. So, at 5 AM, Elaine made a phone call to the local police to report her husband as missing. But Edward wouldn't be missing for long. Just 19 minutes after Elaine made the missing persons report, rower Stephen Kieran was out on the Brisbane River. He was the first rower out that morning, and as he rowed past the South Brisbane Sailing Club, he noticed something in his peripheral vision. In front of the boathouse, Kieran spotted what he thought looked to be a body. He directed the morning joggers away and pulled his boat up onto the bank so he could go and take a closer look. What he discovered was an absolutely horrific scene.
He was in a fetal position, he was naked, he defecated. There was blood all up the wall of the boat shed. His head was back and he was basically cut from ear to ear through his throat. And it was a very messy, horrible scene.
Police Chief Patrick Glancy was the first to arrive on scene at about 6 AM. Despite a long career of investigations covering many different murder scenes, Glancy said that this was one of the worst, and it made a long-lasting impression on him and the other officers. Police were stunned by the brutal nature of this attack. Edward Baldock was naked except for his socks, and he had been stabbed 27 times in the neck, chest and back, although it is said that it could have been more than 27 times because some of the stab wounds were in the same place, creating a big wound, unfortunately. So it could be more than that, but what pathologists were able to conclude was that there were 27 definitive stab wounds. The main injuries were to the front and back of his neck. Huge gaping holes marked the 2 major injuries, with 14 additional satellite stab wounds. The spine in his neck and his spinal cord were almost entirely severed. An injury like that would have required extensive force. The 2 main arteries on the left side of his neck were severed, and the adjacent jugular vein was partially severed. His chest showed 3 further stab wounds. His injuries were so extensive that he'd almost been decapitated. The only thing holding his head on his body was his spine, and officers said that when they turned him over to inspect the front of his body, his head just stayed where it was, almost like it was pretty much detached from his body. The stab wounds in his back had created a wound the size of a bread and butter plate. Also, there was evidence that following his death, somebody had put their fingers in the wounds. So, obviously, straight away, police began their investigation. Initially, they thought that they must be looking for a gang of men, at least one strong male assailant, but more likely multiple, due to the brutal nature of the attack. But very soon into their investigation, they discovered 2 pieces of crucial evidence. The first piece of evidence was a blue wallet that they found tucked under the sailing club door. The wallet contained a card that had the initials E. Baldock on the front. This allowed the police to identify the victim as being that of 47-year-old Edward Baldock. The second clue that investigators found would lead them straight to Edward's killer. It became clear that before his death, Edward had undressed, most likely voluntarily by the nature of it, and he'd neatly folded his clothes and stacked them in a pile. Among the clothes were a pair of tan men's shoes. When police looked inside the shoes, they found a bank card identical to the one belonging to Edward Baldock that they'd found in his wallet, tucked right into the toe of the left shoe. But this card was registered in a different name. The initials on the card read T.A. Wigginton. Now, it's not known whether Edward put the card there as some sort of insurance, or whether he picked it up mistakenly believing it was his card because it looked the same, or whether perhaps one of those involved put it there to point investigators towards the culprit. But whatever the situation was, it was a massive, massive clue for the police, and so far the only lead they had to go on. By 10 a.m, police were at an address in a northern suburb of Brisbane, where 24-year-old Tracey Wigginton answered the door. At that point, police were basically just going through the motions of interviewing them. They had this lead and they needed to follow it up. They really were not considering that this could possibly have been perpetrated by a woman due to the brutal nature of the attack. Even though Tracey had quite a commanding appearance. At 24 years old, Tracey was 6 foot tall and weighed 114 kilos. But again, female killers usually kill their partners and their families. And according to the Australian Institute of Criminology, in 1990 to 1991, only 10% of homicide perpetrators were female. So detectives began by telling Tracey that they'd found her bank card and asking her where she thinks she may have lost it. Tracey explained that she and some friends had visited a park the night before. She said they'd sat on some swings in the park and were pushing each other around, and that was potentially where she'd lost the card. Again, police generally believed her to begin with because they had no reason not to, and they really didn't think that this could have been committed by a woman. And it was conceivably possible that Edward may have been stumbling through the park drunk and found a card that he thought to have been his and picked it up along the way. But given the size of the lead and the chances of her card being found in this murder victim's shoe, the officers had to do their due diligence and make sure that they could at the very least rule her out entirely. Police asked if they could take a look at Tracey's car, which was a green Holden Commodore that she'd used to drive to the park the night before. Tracey happily agreed. She was friendly and cooperative. But when they searched Wigginton's car, in the boot they found a crumpled up towel that was a brown colour and looked to be soaked through with what they thought was dried blood. When they first found this piece of evidence, they didn't actually say anything to Tracey, and at this point they hadn't even told her about the murder. But when they found the towel, it was then that they told Tracey that they'd found her card at the scene of a crime and asked if she would be willing to come down to the police station to make a statement and participate in a taped interview. Again, Tracey was very cooperative. She said yes and decided to go down to the station with the police officers. On the way to the station, the police made a stop via Orley Park, which was where the attack occurred. Tracey pointed out the area in the park that she and her friends were playing at and explained that that must have been where she lost her card. When police told her that that is where a murder had taken place, she said, "Oh no!" Then Tracey told the police that there had actually been a third person present that night, Lisa Ptachinski. Tracey hadn't initially told the police about Lisa because she was dating Lisa on the side and didn't want her girlfriend Debbie to find out. So, while Tracey was down at the police station, the other officers remained at the flat where they continued to question Tracey's flatmates. One of the women she lived with was also called Tracey, and the other was her on-again, off-again girlfriend, Debbie. After some intense questioning, Tracey D told police officers that Tracey Wigginton had arrived home at about 7:30 a.m. that morning, anxious, stressed out, and saying that she'd seen a dead body. It was said that after Tracey and her friends left the park that evening, she went home and went to sleep. When she woke up, she discovered that her card was missing. She and one friend had gone back to the park to try and find it, but instead they stumbled upon a man's dead body. They freaked out and left. Tracey then went home to her own flat and shouted to her girlfriend Debbie, "I need you in the bedroom right now, I've just seen a dead body." Debbie then drove Tracey again back to Waugh Park, but by that time the police were swarming the area. Tracey then became distressed and said, "Oh my god, it's real," before curling up in the fetal position in the car. The women then returned to their flat and Tracey went to sleep after Debbie gave her some sleeping pills. 3 hours later was when the police knocked on the door, and Debbie said she was very surprised to see how calmly Tracey answered the door and how she spoke to them in a way that was just like it was just some kind of minor issue. It was quite the contrast to the behaviour she'd been displaying earlier that morning. But at this stage, police down at the station didn't really have any reason to hold Tracey. Aside from failing to report a dead body, there was no evidence other than the card to tie her to the scene, so they were about to let her go. But that was when the information that the officers from the flat reported back to the police. So then they decided to conduct a second interview. Police told Tracey about the information that her flatmates had shared with them. She then became distressed and upset and said that yes, she had seen a dead body. It was horrible, she said. She said her and her friends didn't know what to do, they were scared shitless, to quote her, and so they just left. However, at the same time that Tracey was having these conversations in her interview with the police, on the other side of town, Tracey's lover, Lisa Ptachinski, was telling a very different story to the officers. She had shown up to the police station of her own volition, saying that she had been witness to a murder perpetrated by her girlfriend, Tracey Wigginton. But not only did Ptachinski tell the police of the murder, she went completely above and beyond the call of duty and started spilling the truth about everything relating to what led to the sequence of events. She told police how her murderous lover was a vampire and had previously forced Ptachinski to slit her wrists just so she could drink her blood. As soon as police had Ptachinski's confession, they pounced on Tracey. Police interviewed Tracey a third time and told her that her friends had confessed. At this point, Tracey knew that they must be telling the truth because there was no other way that they could possibly know about Lisa, because she hadn't said her name, she hadn't mentioned her flatmates didn't know about Lisa, so it had to be legit. Initially, Tracey became distressed, but once she was convinced that the confession was real, she calmly said to officers, "Put the tape back in and I'll tell you everything that happened." She stated very matter-of-factly that her last two accounts had been total lies. And then she told them everything and confessed in grisly detail everything that she had done to poor Edward Baldock the night before. Tracey told police that that night she and 3 friends had been at a local lesbian bar, Club L'Amour's, in Brisbane's nightclub district. After drinking champagne together, they decided they were going to find a random man, and lure him into the car. They were originally planning this as a bit of a joke. They were going to take him down to the river, Tracey would get him all turned on, hot and bothered, and then just leave him to it. But as Tracey continued to share the details of what happened, it became clear that what actually happened was a lot more brutal and horrific than what she said. So on the night of October the 21st, 1989, Tracey Wigginton was drinking at the bar with her lover, Lisa Ptachinski, who was aged 24, and her 2 friends, Kim Jervis and Tracey Waugh, both aged 23. The night before everything unfolded, Wigginton had dyed her hair midnight black and told Ptachinski that she needed to find a victim to feed on. Tracey convinced the 3 other girls to help her fulfill her vampiric needs. Her 3 friends were very impressionable, and later it became clear that they'd been completely sucked into Tracey Wigginton's world. They fully believed that Tracey was a vampire and used to drink the blood of animals, although Tracey later denied this. It was said that the 4 of them all seemed to be in a celebratory mood. They were drinking the champagne, which was different from their usual drinks orders, and it seemed like they were really on a high and excited about something. At about 11:30 p.m. that night, the 4 ladies left the bar and got into Tracey's green Holden Commodore, touring the streets, blasting Prince on the stereo and looking for an unsuspecting victim. Meanwhile, Edward Baldock had decided to make his way home. He just enjoyed a night of success after winning his darts tournament and had spent his winnings on rounds of drinks for everyone. The poor man was so drunk that he couldn't hold himself up without clinging to a pole, and he could barely speak. The 4 girls drove past and saw that he was struggling to hail a taxi because of his inebriated condition. Between them, they decided that they would pose as sex workers to try and lure Edward into the car. So, Kim Jervis, the more attractive of the 4 of them, got out and managed to convince Edward to get in the car on the promise of more to come if he went along with them. Poor Edward, probably thinking that his string of luck was only continuing, that this group of young women would be so interested in him, happily got in the car. But what he didn't know was that unfortunately he was being lured to his death. Wigginton drove the 7 kilometres to Orley Park that she knew would be pretty well deserted at this time of the night. Leaving the 3 women in the car, she led Edward into the park with the promise of sex. She removed her shirt and told him to get undressed as well, but she said that she needed to go and pee, but she asked him to stay where he was and get ready for her when she came back. This is when Edward must have folded his clothes neatly, and potentially sensing that something could go wrong, he pushed his wallet under the door of the sailing club, maybe suspecting he might end up getting robbed. We don't know for sure. Wigginton later told police that Baldock had turned to her and said, "What are you doing?" as she was shiftily behaving, and she said nothing. But what she was actually doing is that she worried that Baldock, even in his insanely drunk state, might still be able to overpower her, so she'd gone back to the car to get Lisa Ptachinski to come and help her. Lisa also had a knife that was provided to her by Kim Jervis. Lisa was just about to stab Edward, but apparently he turned around to look at her and she lost her nerve. Tracey then took the knife from her and plunged it into Edward's back up to its hilt, requiring an extensive amount of force. Lisa then fled back to the car and Tracey continued on her frenzied attack. Tracey said that Edward tried to grab her hand, but she pushed him down. She withdrew the knife and started stabbing him again in one side of the neck and then the other. She stabbed him over and over and over again. Finally, she pulled him up by his hair and slashed his throat from ear to ear. But sadly, Edward was still alive. He was making gurgling sounds and he rolled onto his side. Tracey continued to stab his neck again. She said that she was trying to get into his bones and sever his nerves. To make sure that he was dead, she plunged the knife deep into his side one last time. Tracey then apparently told detectives that she put her face into the cavity that she'd created in his back to drink his blood. Although there are no witnesses to support this, but the evidence of the finger marks and the wounds do kind of suggest that somebody had been, messing with the body afterwards. Finally, as blood started to well in Edward's mouth, Tracey stopped the attack, rested against the sailing club door, and sat and lit a cigarette as she watched Edward take his last breath. Once he was motionless and she was convinced that he was dead, she got up, threw the knife in the Brisbane River and washed her hands. Then Tracey got dressed and returned to the car where the other 3 girls were waiting for her and had been waiting for the last half hour. Apparently, they didn't believe that she was actually going to go through with it, but when she came back to the car, they knew what she had done. Kim Jervis then said to Tracey, "Have you fed?" And Tracey said yes. She brought Lisa Ptachinski and Kim Jervis down to view her handiwork. The whole time, Tracey Waugh stayed in the car. Kim Jervis then said, "You looked like you've had a 3-course meal." All 3 girls would later say that they smelt blood on Tracey's breath when she returned to the car. Shortly after, all 4 women were arrested and charged with murder. Tracey Wigginton pled guilty pretty much straight away. This meant that very few details of the crime were released to the public, and that included her confession. She was sentenced in 1991 and her sentencing lasted just 9 minutes. So while her guilty plea spared the family the trauma of having to relive every single horrible detail of what their family member had gone through in his last moments of life, it left Australia spinning. They had no idea what could have driven these 4 women to participate in such a heinous crime. It was obvious that Tracey was deeply disturbed, but it wasn't until psychologists and psychiatrists looked into Tracey Wigginton's background and saw the series of events that had led her to become this cold-blooded killer. Tracey Wigginton grew up in the northern city of Rockhampton in Australia. She lived through a dreadful childhood. Tracey was adopted by the age of 3 by her grandparents, George and Avril Wigginton. By all accounts, they treated her appallingly. Not only did George regularly sexually assault her, but Avril would beat her relentlessly. Her favourite form of punishment was by flogging them with the cord from a clothes iron, especially on the soles of their feet. Not only were they physically violent, but Tracey claims her grandparents were deeply interested in the occult. However, even though her childhood was absolutely marred with abuse, they were actually really, really rich. George was a self-made millionaire thanks to a lucrative earth-moving business that drummed up an enormous number of government contacts. In fact, George was so well known that the Rockhampton Council named a street after him. The Wiggintons were one of the most powerful and influential families in the community. But nobody knew what was going on behind closed doors. According to family who were interviewed by media during the initial trial, Avril absolutely detested George and spent most of her spare time doting on her chihuahuas when she was not abusing and screaming at the children. When she was a teenager, Tracey attended a prestigious private girls' school. She was interested in playing the organ, ballroom dancing, and other girls. But unfortunately, she was kicked out quite early on for assaulting some of the other girls. She was then sent to a Catholic convent school, but she did not last long. After Tracey was arrested, her birth mother, Rhonda, fronted up to the media. She said that she didn't believe there was any way her daughter was capable of such a horrific crime. She told them of a story when Tracey was a young child and they had a sick chicken that needed to be executed, and Tracey couldn't even bring herself to do that, so she couldn't fathom how it was possible her daughter had turned into this monster. However, during the trial of the other 3 girls, it later came out that Tracey suffered from a severe mental illness, which is not really any great surprise when you consider everything that happened. According to medical experts, Tracey had multiple personality disorder, and there were at least 5 different personalities living within Tracey. They said they considered 2 of them to at least be capable of murder. According to a psychologist report, Tracey's personalities included Little Tracey, which was an innocent childlike version, Big Tracey, a woman with severe depression, the Observer, which was a disconnected, icy personality, Bobby, a frightening and brutal person, probably the one capable of murder, and Avril, the reincarnation of Tracey's horrendous, abusive grandmother. Psychologists said they believed that Bobby and Avril were most likely the personalities to have taken hold of Tracey at the time of the murder. Tracey underwent hypnosis to try and work out the differences between the different personalities. When psychologist Dr. Chris Clark from the University of New South Wales asked Tracey to describe the moment she set eyes on her victim, Dr. Clark said that Tracey's face literally changed and that she adopted the voice of Bobby and growled and said, "I want him." Multiple personality disorder is an extremely complex mental illness and can often be triggered by serious childhood abuse and trauma. It's like the brain's coping mechanism to try and separate themselves from the pain and suffering. They create different personalities to distance themselves from what's happening. It means that they can tell that the horrific events happened to somebody else, but not them. The disorder is categorized by 2 or more distinct identities that have power over a person's behavior. There is still some debate about the disorder. However, during Wigginton's trial, a psychiatrist for the prosecution felt that her illness had just been concocted by some well-meaning doctors. But the Ron Hicks book, The Vampire Killer, dove deep into Wigginton's family background, and when you look at all the evidence and the history of what this woman went through, it's really no surprise that she turned out the way that she did. Now, I just want to say right now, as a sort of a sidebar, I'm not saying that this excuses what she did. I think what she did was absolutely horrific, but I just want to provide the facts to help us understand what turns a person into a monster, you know? Like, obviously she still decided to carry it out, but I think it's important to understand how upbringing influences what a person becomes, you know? So anyway, as it turns out, Tracey's grandmother Avril had a nightmarishly similar childhood to that of Tracey, if not worse, believe it or not. Apparently, Avril was sexually abused by an uncle who adopted her when she was just 11 years old because her parents' marriage fell apart. As a teenager, Avril was beaten with a bottle and raped on a train track by a friend of the family, which, God, compounding with like what she was going through with her uncle, it's little wonder she turned out to be a horrific person as well. So Avril and George Wigginton got married in the late 1930s, but she soon realized that she was unable to have children of her own. But she still wanted to become a parent, so the two went on to adopt two girls, Rhonda and Doral, who later talked about the awful experience they had growing up in their household as well. Avril was said to be absolutely vicious in her discipline of the girls. She would flog them and refuse to let them have any friends. And obviously, it's no surprise that Avril and George's marriage started to fall apart. George had brought himself a new home and he started to entertain several other lady friends on the side. Avril continued to add to her family, even though how is this woman allowed to adopt children? I don't know. She adopted an intellectually disabled girl, Mary, and later Tracey's half-sister, Michelle. In the mid-1960s, Tracey's biological mother, Rhonda, married a local painter. The couple had Tracey about 5 years later, but Avril seriously did not approve of the marriage, and she did everything in her power to ensure that that relationship fell apart. So, of course, it did. When the marriage came to an end, Avril immersed herself in Tracey's life so much that Tracey was pretty much isolated from her own mother. By the time Tracey was 3, Avril had legally adopted her, and Rhonda had moved away from Brisbane to live with another man. Rhonda had pretty much nothing to do with her daughter, and I kind of do feel sorry for her because it must have been very hard for her to separate herself from her abusive mother, but I can see how she may not have known what to do, but yeah, it's still sad. Anyway, Avril then became a very nasty drunk. She started to drink a lot, and when she was drunk, she would get even meaner and she would beat Michelle, Tracey's half-sister, relentlessly. In addition to that, Avril would also have friends over who would join in on the beating of Michelle. And the whole time, little baby Tracey is just there watching all of this unfold before her. Following in her mother's upbringing footsteps, Tracey was also isolated and not allowed to have any friends. Along with the abuse she was experiencing at home, Tracey was massive for her age, and she always towered over her other classmates, which can't have helped with her already feeling like an outsider. Her only real friend was her half-sister Michelle, who, thankfully for her, managed to run away from Avril's clutches at the age of 15. Michelle would later say that her only regret was that she didn't take a then 8-year-old Tracey with her at the time. In her early teens, it is said that Tracey was absolutely obsessed with the occult. She loved Ouija boards and tarot cards. In 1979, George died from cancer. Shortly after, in 1981, Avril also died, but not before passing off the reins of discipline to one of her male friends, making him promise that he would continue to keep Tracey in check. But during one of these incidents, Tracey actually fought back, and the man ended up needing to be hospitalized with severe head injuries. And you know, like, it sucks like for her, but I can't imagine that. At just 16 years old, Tracey had had an affair with a friend's husband, and sadly she'd fallen pregnant, so she then went on to have an abortion. By the time she was 18 years old, she was entitled to inherit $75,000 that had been left to her by her grandparents. However, Tracey had no idea what to do with money when she had it, and so she quickly frittered it away on frivolous things like cars and drinking and, living this large lifestyle. And at 18 years old, Tracey was a pretty imposing figure. She dressed like a biker, she was at this stage 6 feet tall and weighed 210 pounds. Sadly, her life only continued to decline from there. She had a brief stint working as a sex worker, stepped up her interest in satanic rituals and the occult, and began an intense love affair with a woman by the name of Sunshine. The two eventually married in a civil ceremony. When Tracey turned 21, she inherited a further $80,000 from her grandparents. But again, the same thing happened. She quickly managed to spend it all on pretty much nothing. Her relationship with Sunshine was going downhill. Unfortunately, their marriage didn't last, even though they had tried to have a child together, but sadly, Tracey had miscarried the baby. And it's in 1989, when her relationship with Sunshine ended, that Tracey met the 3 women that she would later become involved with in this horrible act. They became friends over their shared interest of the occult, vampires, and the fact that they were all gay. And as a queer person, I can attest to this, you do flock to other queer people that you know who share common interest. Lisa Ptachinski, who became Tracey's lover, was seen to have this obsession with trying to kill herself. Ptachinski apparently had been admitted to hospital over 80 times for trying to slit her wrists or take an overdose of pills. Most of these attempts were put down to meaningless attention-seeking behavior, which seems real sad, and I really wish for her that she'd gotten the proper mental health help that she needed, because obviously that is a big deal. But it became very clear that despite how disturbed Lisa appeared to be, it was very clear that Tracey was the ringleader. Lisa was quite easily led and clearly looking for a place to belong, and she found that perfect match with Tracey. So when the trial of the 3 girls began, and they did have a trial because the 3 of them pled not guilty, this was the first time that the media in Australia had been given any insight into actually what happened, because when Tracey was sentenced, there were just no details released. And as usually happens in these cases, the actual murder of Edward Baldock kind of became like a bit of a sideline event, because the topic of conversation, like these vampire lesbians, was just too much for the people to handle. The story took Australia by storm, and the story even made news headlines around the world. The headlines of things like Lesbian Vampire Killer were printed everywhere, and it was just too good for them not to take an interest. The women themselves didn't take the stand, but during their trials, the videotaped interviews of them were shown, and they covered everything from lesbianism to incest to vampirism to satanic worship. It was like a media frenzy. The taped interviews show that the women said they were too scared to leave the car when Tracey Baldock arrived at the park that night. Apparently, she threatened that if any of them touched her, she would be liable to rip their arms off. They were reluctant to believe that Tracey could be capable of murder, but apparently they were convinced when she returned back to the car, and they could apparently smell blood on her breath. In the weeks leading up to the killings, the 4 girls became more and more invested in this world of satanic worship, and they'd even picnicked in a local cemetery and stolen a tombstone. Apparently, the girls felt totally controlled by Tracey. They firmly believed that she had some sort of supernatural power. On one occasion, she told them to sit in front of her cross-legged and maintain eye contact with her. They say that they saw Tracey's body disappear, and they just saw like 2 floating cat eyes where she was supposed to be. In the week before the murder, Tracey and a friend had watched a vampire movie where a couple had been abducted and killed. And apparently they also watched a video of someone getting their head blown off with a shotgun again and again and again. And I've read in some different places too that she forced the 3 girls to watch that video multiple times, even against their will. I don't know that for certain though. And then the actual videotapes of Tracey's psychiatric interviews and assessments were released during the trial. And this kind of raised like a big discussion in Australia. Like, was this ethical? She was supposedly bound by patient-doctor confidentiality, and kind of where do you draw the line between that and the public's right to know about what happened? Tracey didn't want these interviews to get out there, and apparently that's part of the reason why she decided to plead guilty, is she didn't want her private life and her family history aired for all the world to see. Some feminist groups at the time said that because Tracey was a survivor of incest, she should be excused for acting out a murder where she visualized her abusive grandfather as being the person. But in the end, Tracey was sentenced to a life sentence, because in Australia, when you plead guilty, you automatically get a life sentence. Lisa Ptachinski was also convicted of murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment. But she was released in 2008 after her application for resettlement leave was approved by the Queensland Parole Board. She had served 17 years in prison and has managed to keep out of the media spotlight entirely since her release. Kim Jervis was found guilty of manslaughter and was sentenced to 18 years, but she was released after serving just 12. All three women pleaded not guilty and were determined to pull all the punches. They put all the blame heavily on Tracey, and their defense was that if they didn't go along with what Tracey wanted, they were going to end up in the same situation as Edward Baldock did. Lisa Ptachinski was determined to paint Tracey as this evil, murderous vampire. She even told the court that Tracey had regularly bought blood from a butcher just so she could drink it. She also repeated the story that she told the police about how Tracey had forced her to cut her wrist so that she could drink her blood. Tracey Waugh, however, was actually completely acquitted after her defense argued that she had played no active role in the murder and had actually tried to stop Kim Jervis from taking part. Now, Tracey actually did pretty well in prison. She earned herself the nickname Fang, she set herself up in the prison library, and even managed to gain a Bachelor of Arts majoring in philosophy and anthropology. I did read that she assaulted a fellow inmate and a prison guard in 2006, but I couldn't find any more information about that. In 2009, she applied for early release, but she was denied due to the seriousness of her crimes. The report said that Tracey still posed somewhat of a risk to the community, so they were not going to let her out anytime soon. However, Tracey appealed this decision, and a psychologist report stated that they felt that Tracey posed a moderate to mild risk to the general public over the next 7 to 10 years. And so, Tracey Wigginton, having served 22 years behind bars, was released from the low-security Nuremberg prison farm at 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday, the 11th of January, 2012. The conditions of her release are that she make no contact with her co-conspirators of the original crime, nor is she allowed to reach out to any of Edward Baldock's family. She's also not allowed to talk to the media or sell her story in any way to make any kind of financial gain from what she did. Upon her release, she expressed extreme remorse for the killings and once again reiterated that she never considered herself to be a vampire. However, in February 2019, Tracey once again made headlines, but this time for what she'd been posting on the internet.
She's known as Queensland's vampire killer. Tracey Wigginton lured an innocent man to his death so she could feast upon him. But now 9 News can reveal she's out on parole and posting disturbing images online that have the police who caught her worried.
It's hard to be famous.
Yeah.
A legend in my own mind.
Tracey Wigginton, a cold-blooded killer who murdered a man to drink his blood.
Just making a gargling sound. I knew the blood was coming out of his mouth.
That was in 1989, and this is now. Despite being given a life sentence, Tracey Wigginton has been released on parole and is living and moving freely around the southeast. 9 News can reveal since being released 7 years ago, she's been posting dozens of confronting images on Facebook, including images telling people to panic, photos of vampires, skulls and bones in a burial site, ghosts and skeletons, and even an image that references eating people. The police who arrested her say it's consistent with the Tracey they knew at the time of the murder.
And she's obviously enjoying the notoriety she's getting too.
Anything like that's disturbing for people to get enjoyment out of that type of thing. If she's still on parole, they might want to revisit it.
It was here in Orley Park, West End, where Tracey Wigginton committed the murder that not only shocked Queensland, but also made international headlines. 47-year-old Edward Baldock was lured here by Tracey and her friends, and then became their random and innocent victim.
The purpose of the murder was for her to be able to drink human blood, and I think that's what was achieved.
Now, this is where the deceased was located this morning.
Detective Mick Austin knows Tracey Wigginton well and didn't believe her lies at the crime scene.
I can't remember exactly, but Kimmy and I were sort of racing all around this area here.
The detectives were suspicious when they found a stolen tombstone in her apartment and also a collage of graveyard photos. And after her friends dobbed her in...
I knew she was going to kill him, but I couldn't stop her.
Why?
Because of her craving for blood. She said that it's like, have you ever seen a shark? Frenzy, feeding frenzy.
Tracey then confessed as well.
Where did you stab him first?
Back of the neck here.
How hard?
Hard enough to drive the knife up to the hilt. I then withdrew the knife and I stabbed him in the side of the neck. I stabbed him on the other side of the neck and I continuously stabbed him.
Today, Wigginton is now living between Brisbane and the Gold Coast at Tamborine under the new name Oberon Fairchild. Despite denying to psychiatrists she is a vampire.
Put in my little plastic teeth in my sunnies and be right. It just seems so absurd.
Her public Facebook posts are a constant stream of deathly images, including a vampire, memes about watching horror films, ghosts, and even images of real human skeletons. She also posted a picture stating, "Do not meddle in the affairs of dragons, for you are crunchy and good with ketchup." All of them haunting images for Edward Baldock's family.
Obviously, this sort of content really alarmed the community. Particularly upset by this was the family of Edward Baldock, who were quite honestly outraged that she was allowed to post stuff like this and very concerned that the parole board wasn't monitoring what it was that she was doing. Mr. Baldock's daughter, also named Tracey, demanded to know why authorities weren't taking action, and when put to the Queensland Council, they really had nothing to say about it. In fact, they issued a warning that anybody who tried to get a statement from Tracey Wigginton about the matter would be sentenced to 2 years in jail. However, later it was said that they said that the district attorney was going to review the case, but it's not known whether they did or whatever came of that. I wasn't able to find anything. Sadly, as is common in many murder cases, the true character of Edward Baldock was pretty much lost in the media frenzy. Mr. Baldock's family really want the public to know that while yes, he was the victim of a terrible, terrible crime, he was much more than that. Edward Baldock, who was just 47 at the time of his death, was a father of 5 and a grandfather to 2. He loved his job, he loved the beach, he loved his family, he was an incredible darts player, and he had a lot to live for, and it was unfairly taken from him. Mr. Baldock's daughter Tracey still remembers what a dedicated father he was. He'd always take them to the beach on the weekends, he loved playing with his children so much that he often had to be pulled away by his wife, and she talked fondly of the weekly pizza night they used to have, that not all the family used to enjoy because usually it involved just getting the full contents of the fridge and putting whatever they could find on top of a pizza and calling it a day. And the Baldocks say that while they no longer have Edward in their lives, they have these beautiful memories of him, and that is something that the killers can never take away from him. So if you are still with me, thank you so much for watching. This case is a crazy one and I tried to kind of cover it as succinctly as I could. There is so much information out there, but also like not a lot. There's kind of like some conflicting statements as well. It's hard to know what is true. I've seen different accounts of who found the body, whether it was the rower or whether it was a jogger. So I did my best to kind of roll with what seemed to be the most reliable information, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. I honestly just think this case is sad. Like, it is sad all around that, you know, poor Mr. Baldock was just like in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it's sad that Tracey had this just honestly awful upbringing that to be quite honest, I can't see how there's any version of events where she could have lived like a happy, normal life. She doesn't even know how to be a normal person after what she's been through. And, you know, she's released now, and I've seen pictures of her and stuff like that. And, you know, I wonder what she's doing, you know? Like, I wonder what hopefully she, I don't know, found some sort of peace within herself, or like had some serious therapy while she was in jail, because like, what kind of life can you have when that is like the first 24 years of your life is just an actual living nightmare? You know, when you hear stories like these, it's really no wonder that people turn to things like the occult and Satanism. It's like, I bet you know, that they're looking to find something that kind of, I don't know, makes their trauma make sense. I don't know, it's just sad. And I wasn't able to really find anything on the other 3 women involved. I know that basically the details of what we have about Lisa Ptachinski's life, she sounds like a sad character too, but I don't know her background and what led her to become what she did. But, you know, over 80 attempts on your life, whether it's attention seeking or not, is pretty damn serious. And to be honest, she kind of shouldn't have been let out of hospital, I don't think. She clearly was a woman in need of help. Yeah, anyway, there's not much to be said about the rest of the women. They're all managed to keep well out of the limelight. But yeah, let me know, what are your thoughts on this story? I mean, it's quite a wild one. Thank you for watching. If you've stayed with me this far, comment below. If you do like this video, please feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell. I post videos every single week, and I like to kind of cover a broad range of stories from all over the world. I don't just kind of stick to New Zealand or Australia or anything like that, so do stay tuned. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.